On January 3, 2026, the U.S. didn't negotiate an extradition. It launched an operation inside Caracas, seized Venezuela's sitting president Nicolas Maduro, and moved him into U.S. custody to face narco, terrorism, and drug charges. That's the official framing, a strike against narco-terrorism. One of the issues with this reasoning is that Trump pardoned Juan Orlando Hernandez, the former president of Honduras, who had been convicted in a U.S. court on major drug trafficking and weapons-related charges. So the question isn't just kidnap or arrest, it's how consistent is this standard, and who does it apply to? Quick one. Hit like if you enjoy a longer proper breakdown and drop a comment with your take as we go. First, the extraction and what's been reported. This wasn't improvised. Reporting describes months of planning, rehearsals, and a real-time intelligence effort tracking Maduro's routine. Late January 2nd into early January 3rd, the operation reportedly began with air activity and strikes aimed at disabling defenses and limiting Venezuela's ability to respond quickly. The reporting describes a large-scale support package: aircraft, refueling, drones, and electronic warfare. Basically the kind of setup you use when you want a short window of control. It looked like a scene from a movie. Late-night helicopters flew over Caracas. Accounts describe a raid that was fast, loud, and dangerous. At least one helicopter was reportedly hit, but kept flying. A team moved on a safe house location. U.S. officials say Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, were secured, and then the clock started. Get out of the city, get offshore, get airborne, and get them out of the region before the political shockwave could catch up. Now for the fallout: Venezuela, the region, and the UN. Inside Venezuela, officials described heavy losses around Maduro's protective detail and activation of forces nationwide. Politically, the state didn't collapse. It shifted. Within days, Maduro's circle moved to install Delcy Rodriguez as interim president and project continuity. Outside Venezuela, the reaction split sharply. Some governments condemned the operation as a violation of sovereignty and warned about the precedent. Others were quieter, or focused on Maduro's alleged criminality rather than the method used to seize him. And at the United Nations, the core concern was simple. When powerful states normalize cross-border seizures of leaders, the global system gets more unstable, even if the target is unpopular. If you want more breakdowns like this, where we separate the timeline from the spin, subscribe. Now the legal fight, because this is where the entire story either holds up or collapses. International law starts with a blunt baseline. You generally can't use force inside another country. The exceptions people argue about are narrow: UN Security Council authorization, consent from the territorial state, or self-defense after an armed attack. The U.S. framing has leaned on law enforcement language. Basically, this was a targeted capture tied to major criminal allegations, including narco-terrorism. The pushback is equally blunt. Criminal charges don't automatically create a legal right to violate another state's sovereignty. If there was no UN authorization, no Venezuelan consent, and no qualifying self-defense justification, critics argue it's illegal, full stop, even if the target is guilty. That's the real global anxiety here. Not just, what did Maduro do? But, is this going to become normal, and who really are the good guys anymore? Because if indictment plus military power becomes a usable method, other states will copy it, and the world will become a free-for-all with perpetual war. Now, U.S. law, war powers, and the law enforcement label. The Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war, but presidents repeatedly use force without advance approval, arguing it's limited, urgent, or tied to national interest. So the domestic debate is basically this. Supporters argue this was a lawful capture of an indicted figure tied to narco-terrorism and drug trafficking, and the president can act quickly in a national security context. Critics argue you can't call something law enforcement while it looks and sounds like a military strike inside a foreign capital. Then treat Congress as an afterthought. Even if notification happens after, scale and precedent matter, because it resembles war-making by the executive branch. In other words, this isn't just a foreign policy story. It's a checks and balances story. Now back to the part of this story that doesn't sit well with me and seems hypocritical. The administration's framing leans on narco-terrorism. That Maduro wasn't just a political leader, he was running or enabling a criminal system so severe it justified extraordinary action. But Trump also pardoned Juan Orlando Hernandez, a former president convicted in U.S. court on serious drug and weapons-related charges, who was thought to have been involved in flooding the U.S. with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of drugs. Supporters of the pardon argue Hernandez was unfairly prosecuted or politically targeted, and they'll say Maduro is uniquely dangerous. Critics argue this exposes a political double standard. Narco-terrorism becomes a label used hardest on enemies, while politically convenient figures get mercy. You don't have to pick a side to see the problem. It muddies the moral clarity of the Maduro operation. If the claim is, we're consistent and principled about narco-terrorism, the Hernandez pardon makes audiences ask, consistent for who and for what reasons? And that matters because credibility should be the bedrock of any legal system. If you found this interesting, let me know your view of this in the comments, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload.